shovel or a pick.
In a mine, in a mine, in a mine, in a mine, where a million diamonds shine. We dig, 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 dig from early morn till night. We dig, 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 dig up everything inside.
We dig up diamonds by the score.
1,000 rubies, sometimes more, but we don't know what we took them for. We dig, 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 a dig, dig.
Hi everybody, welcome to our story time today. I've chosen a story out of one of my books today. It's called Seriously Silly Stories, and the one I'm going to read to you today, well, part one today, is Snow White and the 7 Aliens. And there's the front cover of this story, Snow White and the 7 Aliens. It's looking funny already, isn't it? Let's see what happens. Snow White dreamed of becoming a pop star. She wanted to be #1 of the charts, just like her hero, Hank Hunk from Boy Snog. Snow White had a beautiful voice. She was a great dancer too, and she could even write her own songs. Only one thing stood in her way, her wicked stepmother. Once upon a time, Snow White's stepmother had been a famous pop star. She had been the mean queen lead singer in the wonderful Wicked Witches. But now her voice was croaky, and she was no longer a star. She had become mad with jealousy of Snow White. "You'll never be famous like me," she would hiss. "You look too ordinary. You don't even have a band, and besides, your nose is too small." Then the mean queen would storm out of the room, leaving poor Snow White to weep under the Boy Snog posters in her bedroom. Snow White's father was kind. He was a kind little man. He liked doing jigsaw puzzles and making small plasticine models. Although he loved his daughter, he was not strong enough to stand up to his wife, the Wicked Queen. The mean queen had a huge dressing room at the top of the house with dozens of mirrors and shelves of makeup, as if she was still a great star. And sometimes she forced her poor husband to sit behind the dressing table mirror and tell her that she was still beautiful. "Mirror, mirror on the wall, who has the cutest nose of all?" From behind the mirror, her terrified husband would reply, "Mean queen, you look a treat. What with a nose as perfect as a boiled sweet." Then the mean queen would scream with laughter and march round the house, croaking her ancient songs and remembering the day when the wonderful Wicked Witches had appeared on the Christmas edition of Top of the Pops. You'll have to ask some of your mums and dads about that one. They might remember it like me. Now Snow White often sat in the garden, surrounded by little birdies and bunny rabbits, singing quietly in her beautifully clear voice. When she looked down, the mean queen would almost choke with rage. Day by day, the mean queen could see that Snow White was growing into a very beautiful young woman. With that tiny pink nose, how the mean queen hated her. Only the mirror brought her comfort. "Mirror, mirror, tell me true, is my nose as long as a didgeridoo?" girl's nose is microscopic. What are your feelings on this topic? And the mirror would reply, if you push me, I must admit, Snow White's nose is a decent fit. But your nose, oh Queen, is really small. In fact, it's hardly there at all. And so it went on, until one terrible night, Snow White's father could stand the lies no longer. The mean Queen demanded, mirror, mirror, above the sink, tell me what you really think. It's time you started coming clean. Choose Snow White or me, your queen. In a tiny, trembling voice, the mirror replied, all right, I've had enough. I'm fed up with all the lies and stuff. You're past it, old and sad, crinkly, wrinkly, really bad. Your nose is sort of long and hairy. Beside you, Snow White is a Christmas fairy. The mean Queen leapt to her feet. With a sweep of her bony hand, she sent her makeup and bottles of perfume crashing to the floor. She seized her husband by the collar and lifted him off his feet. Get Snow White out of my house, she spat into his terrified face. Make sure she never ever returns. The poor man crawled towards the door, but the mean Queen had one more order, something so terrible that her husband quaked in his sandals. To prove that Snow White has really gone, bring me that tiny stubby nose on a cocktail stick. Oh, my goodness, he's got to chop off a nose. Do you think he's going to do it? I hope not. And so Snow White's father led his beautiful daughter far into the wild and dangerous city. With tears streaming down his face, he bought her an all-day bus pass and kissed his sweet daughter goodbye. Of course, he could not bring himself to cut off that precious stubby nose, so he quickly modelled a false one out of some pink plasticine which he always carried in his pocket. This he brought back to the mean Queen on a cocktail stick. When the mean Queen saw the little nose, she screamed with laughter all over again. Then she did something so ghastly that her husband felt quite ill. She took the plasticine nose, dipped it in some mayonnaise, and ate it. Oh, served with a side salad and some French fries. She said, licking her lips. Tasty. Meanwhile, poor Snow White wandered through the city, lost and alone. It grew dark and she started to feel afraid. Then in the distance, she saw a dim green light between the buildings. Faint with hunger, she stumbled towards it and found herself in a clearing by a car park. There in front of her was a gleaming silver spacecraft. A little ladder led up to the door where a flashing neon line said, Swinging Spaceship Nightclub. Under this was pinned another smaller notice. This one read, Cleaner wanted, apply within. Too tired to feel afraid, Snow White pushed the bell. Quietly, the door slid open and she stepped nervously inside. And so it was that Snow White began her new life as a cleaner at the Swinging Spaceship Nightclub. The hours were long, the pay was poor, but at least some good bands played from time to time. Who knows, sighed Snow White, Perhaps I might even hear Hank Hunk from Boy Snog one day. One evening, Snow White was told to prepare the dressing room for a special band who would be playing that night. And I'm going to stop there. That was part 1 of our story, Snow White and the 7 Aliens. So join me next time for part 2. Goodbye.